local groups use data that they collect either through the lake monitoring program or through the volunteer stream monitoring program. We have 4 panelists. The first is Chelsea Cooper. She's from the Manistee County Conservation District. The next will be Heather Smith from the Watershed Center, Grand Traverse Bay. Then we will have Ralph Bednarz from Rennie Lake, and Paul will be the caboose with the Huron River Watershed Council. We're going to give each person about 8 to 10 minutes to introduce themselves and their monitoring programs and what it consists, and then give an example of how they present the data they collect to the public and how they use the data to make decisions. We have at 1 hour and 10 minutes total, so we're going to go right up till noon with this. So we'll take a couple of questions after each panelist, and then I'll move it on just so that we can make sure we get to each panelist. And then at the end, we should have some additional time to maybe share some other ways people have used the data and have conversation. So a panel discussion is meant to be conversational. So I encourage you, when you have a question, to turn on your camera and feel free to feel comfortable doing so, because that's the point, is to ask questions and give feedback for things that work for you to help each other. And then conversations could continue past the panel, in the future. So Chelsea, why don't you take it away?
All right. So, hi, I'm Chelsea Cooper from the Manistee Conservation District. It's great to be presenting here today. I have a lot of information I want to cram in here in a short amount of time. So we'll get started sharing my screen here. All right, we'll just focus on the slides here for a minute. All right, here we go. So, all right. Good. So to get started, I'll be sharing a bit today about how we've used MiCorps in our outreach and our community efforts, and how we really used it to tie in all of our projects together in a way that gathered a lot of local media attention, which ultimately gets more eyes on the data. So my presentation is from a little bit different of an angle, but it all ties together. So for a bit of background, MCD's water quality and citizen science efforts here at the district began to be developed in about 2016 with both lake and stream MiCorps programming that a previous employee had initiated. And so then in 2018, I took it all over as an intern for about a year, and I learned the leadership side of things. And then I went on to start my own watershed themed after school program. And that was with a fellow student at the time. So it turns out that there was a huge niche to fill, and we were very successful, but we had programming in 2 of the local schools here in Traverse City. And that was actually until the pandemic hit. And then I found myself out of a job. Because there really was no more room for any more virtual learning at that point in time. So I found myself back at the district in 2021, and then I stepped into the lead role on these programs once again. So you'll see a lot of that K-12 education influence shine through in a lot of what I've built to pair with our MiCorps programming. But at our foundation, we have 9 VSMP sample stream sites and usually have 1 to 2 CLMP lakes per season. And those are funded through a partnership with the Forest Service. And so I mentioned we have our foundational MiCorps programming, and then over the last 2 years, we've used that foundation to connect all of our educational outreach and programming to be built upon. So this includes our K-12, our community outreach, our partner outreach, all of it. So in 2021, we started offering what we call macroinvertebrate workshops within our K-12 classrooms. And I wrote that curriculum for these to focus on being sort of like a replacement for field trips that schools may not have the funding or coordination for. So essentially they bring a watershed to the classroom. And I sample a local stream the night before. So that's how I usually do it. I throw an air stone into the bucket to keep the macros alive that I sample overnight. And then I take them into the classroom the next day. And so they're alive and moving when I bring them in. And so as soon as the workshop's over, and then I put the macros back into the bucket with the air stone, and they go right back to the stream that they came from. All right, and so I framed these, the structure of these workshops to mimic what we do on Volunteer Stream Sampling Day. And we pretend that each sample is its own stream when we're in the classroom. So students are given a fun and colorful presentation beforehand, which here's an example of a little snippet of that. And then they participate in a simplified process of identifying and sorting and rating their pretend streams. And so this does three major things. It gives our water quality efforts exposure, and that includes the data. It gives students something that they can personally look forward to being involved in as they get older, which is citizen science. And then it's based on real life methods within conservation. And so they get so excited to hear that. And framing it this way to them always generates so many questions, especially when I take our macroinvertebrate workshops into the high school. And so all of my curriculums correspond to the state's science standards for their grade as well. And the presentations, the lesson plans, and then the printable materials that they would need are all available online for free for anyone to use. And then so on top of our K through 12 in-classroom outreach, I also use MiCorps methods as a foundation for all of my other outreach as well. As you can tell, I'm really serious about my events corresponding and connecting as different versions of the same thing. And then just to be honest, I still get nervous before presentations all the time. And events like this really helps me to be able to build on what I've experienced as both a citizen and a leader in these citizen science programs. So it all just it's built on what I'm familiar with. So here I am on the top left this past summer presenting to FAP foresters from around Michigan. And that topic was the symbiotic relationship between forests and streams. And then of course I used a version of my macro workshop. And then over on the right here is one of my clean, drain, dry tables I host at community festivals during the summer. And check, I offer macro exploration as an example of foundational stream species threatened by AIS or aquatic invasive species. And then over here on the top right, this was just a fun example. We built a cornhole game to play at our boat wash events. And this sends the message to dump your bait where it belongs. And so that was really fun. And then a few other examples down here at the bottom are where I also tied in our MiCorps methodology. And then, so as far as presenting our actual MiCorps data to the public, we do write a really bright and colorful yearly report for our streams and a report for each one of our lakes as well. We have the usual methods for sharing those. We post them on our website or social media. We send them to partners. And of course, we send them to our local newspaper, which brings me to my next slide. And as you've seen in some of the slides previously, we've had quite a few newspaper articles written about our efforts in the last few years. So one article was actually shared on a national level. That was really exciting. But switching over here to CLMP, this article was written this past September about one of the larger lakes in our area and how I assisted in getting them started on CLMP volunteering. And so that could be a whole presentation in and of itself. But as far as exposure or visibility, I was really given a large platform to express the major benefits of citizen science and how it helps foster stewardship within the areas that the readers call home. And so I'll briefly explain my method of getting your local journalists to notice the great things that you're doing in your area. So first of all I did was go to our local paper's website and I would head over to the profile section and there you'll find all of the email addresses for contacts. So each time I had something to share, I would go down the list and eventually you'll get a feel of who is responsive and who isn't and what their style is and all of that. So after I did that, I would have my core group of 2 to 3 contacts that I knew wrote really great stories and who kind of would welcome the leads. Really the most important thing that I did to get results though was just making it easy for them. So I'd send all of the pictures they would need with the captions. I would write down the who, what, and why, and I would use language that I knew would be quotable, essentially highlighting the human interest aspects of the story and the partnerships forming and any angle that I would imagine being the most interesting to the reader. So making it easy on the writer has been definitely the #1 thing that has gotten my stories published. And then also having great pictures to send them really helps seal the deal as well. So no matter what you're doing, big or small, always take pictures. I take so many pictures when I'm out and about, and it always comes in handy when I'm creating content, just big or small things, or sharing information, or trying to get the story out there. So trust me, it's worth it to always have your camera out. And then also make sure you're editing your pictures before you use them. Like, just like we eat with our eyes, and presentation is so important when it comes to like the restaurant industry and food presentation, that same philosophy is true with any kind of marketing. So if you're marketing your successes through pictures, just make sure you're turning your saturation up just a little bit on your photos, make those colors pop, kind of like in this photo, you know, crop them to a symmetrical ratio, make sure that the angle's straight, and don't be shy for asking for big smiles and poses. These things are very effective, even subconsciously to the viewer. And then also when sharing and creating your content, it's very effective to utilize imaging from your area and the places that your viewers call home. So when training your volunteers or sending out materials to recruit volunteers, make your content as familiar to them as possible. So for example, this year I created this, this is just snippets from our training video, and I created our own, and I used actual pictures and footage of our volunteers and the places that they would be visiting. And I described the program from a Manistee perspective, and our volunteer turnout this year was actually higher than it's ever been. So personalize the program and apply it to your own community. And then just very briefly, when creating your own MiCorps content, there are plenty of free programs available. So all of these do have pro versions, but the first two programs up here especially, they're so useful when you're sharing your data in unique ways or promoting your successes in hopes that those viewing it will join you. So more eyes on your content points to more eyes to your data. And then, so everyone wants to have fun, right? So while you're out having fun and doing all the cool things that you're doing, it's so effective to be presenting those moments in ways where you get the most out of your platform. So going back to this quote from the newspaper, we can share data with the public endlessly, but stewardship potential could increase if the public is offered an opportunity to have a personal connection with the data. And so these are just a few ways to achieve that. All right, and that's the end. Thanks so much for watching. Sorry I can't hand out business cards or anything in person, but here is my LinkedIn, and there we go. All right.
Thanks, Chelsea. I should have said this before you got started. I asked Chelsea to specifically focus on her communication because we have been able to use her communication efforts on our side of things and share them via Facebook and Twitter. And then I share them with my supervisors as well to show all the great work that some of our MiCorps groups are doing. As Joe indicated earlier this morning, getting the word out and getting the story out about MiCorps is super important. And so we are focusing on that ourselves. And one of the things we did was meet with some EGLE communication people, and they said that because EGLE is so large, our communication efforts, though important, aren't as effective as the local ones. So really having those local contexts and those local articles written are super important in getting our story out. So let's see, what questions do we have? Feel free to turn on your camera, and you can raise your hand by going down to the bottom. There's a smiley face with reactions. And when you click on it, there's reactions you could use, but there's also a raise hand function. So if you use that, I can call on you. Let me see. Mostly we got great ideas for education, and that was excellent, Chelsea. So somebody asked if a copy of this presentation will be available later. I think I would suggest that, Lynn, that you just contact Chelsea directly. And Chelsea, maybe you can just type in your email into the chat.
we're recording the presentation, but yeah, so that will be available too.
Oh yeah, right.
I mean, this whole thing that we're doing.
Right. Chelsea, where did you get the list of media people? I missed that.
I just went to our local newspaper's website, and I would either get it off an article, because usually with their contact info, they'll have their email address, or there's a profiles page on the website. And so it was kind of like hit or miss. Like some of them were pretty responsive and some weren't. And so I would just get a feel of who was welcoming the leads, essentially.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
I guess not so much as a question as more of a comment, but maybe someone can get a question from it. And that's that I just really appreciated Chelsea's perspective, because I feel like a lot of us come into this with maybe being data minded first, but I feel like and then communications and marketing is always second. Like it's an afterthought for me. And I never remember to bring my camera anywhere, especially when like I'm leading a group of people and I'm like so involved in that I forget to take pictures. So I appreciate, like, I absolutely like Chelsea's perspective. I don't know if she has any tips for the group to like I don't know if she took journalism classes or what got her to kind of that different type of mindset.
Yeah, I think it was just the educational experience that I've had creating content, and just also my generation being a millennial. I think that has a big influence on it as well. And people do definitely get annoyed with me taking pictures all the time, but I do it anyway.
I was planning on taking a bunch today and last night.
Yeah.
You get the worst pictures doing stream monitoring if you don't tell people to look at the camera and smile, because it's always someone's back or it's always someone bending over. So like if you don't specifically tell them to look at the camera and smile, you'll get all worthless pictures.
I have a question. A question. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Melissa.
I was just gonna, Chelsea, I think it's great that you're working with the intermediate school district, the ISD. And I was wondering if you could tell us how you fostered that relationship, because that would probably be great, another local piece of that puzzle. Oh, you're muted.
Whoops. To answer one of the questions in the chat too, the age levels were 3rd grade and 5th grade. And the way that I did that was I went to the ISD's website, and they didn't have individual teachers' emails, but I emailed the superintendent and asked for contact info for certain grades. Like at that time, I was interested in 3rd and 5th grade. And so that's how I fostered those relationships.
That's fantastic that they actually also responded to you, because that's not always the case. So that's
no. Yeah, they were super responsive.
How did you word your email? Like, as far as like, hey, I'm doing this really exciting. Did you make it sound exciting?
Yeah, I framed it in a way that this could be an alternative to a field trip, and it's bringing the stream into the classroom.
Awesome. I do something like that with my kids every year. I've done it since they're in preschool, and now they're 12 and 15. So, all right. Does anybody have their hand raised?
Dave Larson had his hand up.
Okay. Hi, Dave.
Oh, okay. My annual report, I usually spend about, I would say 2 to 3 hours on it. And I don't have a template. I just kind of made one up. But once you make up the initial template, then you can use it every year. So that's what I've done. And so it takes me significantly less time than the first time I did it, but I usually spend about 2 or 3 hours. I just make it on Word.
It is beautiful, Chelsea. That was one of my comments. Okay, Dave, you can unmute yourself and we'll take your question. There you go.
Okay. I'm a graduate of the MiCorps program, and I actually did a demonstration to some college kids on how to monitor a stream, and I'm not sure if Meeks took your information or vice versa, because there was Michigan Water Corps in that particular unit. But
yeah, nice. And I can definitely get, if there's any organizations that you'd like me to get in touch with, or to share my curriculum with, any teachers that you know, I can definitely do that as well.
Dave, what does MEEC stand for?
Michigan Environmental Education Curriculum Support. It used to be DEQ before it was EGLE.
I thought that was our curriculum.
DNRE. EGLE has been quite a few different acronyms over the years, and I like the current because it looks at habitat, which is what we're all trying to do, is to make sure that the habitat is suitable for critters to survive, whether they be aquatic or terrestrial.
That's right. All right, we're going to move on to Heather. Heather, take it away.
All right, I guess I'm going to share my screen if you'll allow me to. I prepared some last minute slides. Can you see them?
Yeah, it's just not in presentation mode. So if you want to, now we can see your notes. So we have to switch screen.
Oh, yes, I have to switch screen. Sorry about that.
I think that's under display settings.
Yeah, let's see if this works.
There we go. Yep, perfect.
All right. So thanks for having me. My name is Heather Smith. I am the baykeeper, Grand Traverse baykeeper at the Watershed Center, Grand Traverse Bay. For those that are unfamiliar with the area, we're a unique embayment of northern Lake Michigan. You see us in the Traverse City region there in this map. Our watershed covers about 1,000 square miles of land. We've got hundreds of miles of streams. And the mission for the Watershed Center is to advocate for clean water in Grand Traverse Bay and work to preserve and protect the watershed. So just a really quick summary of the program. We coordinate a volunteer stream monitoring program, which we call Adopt a Stream. And Adopt a Stream started at the Watershed Center, maybe 2005, 2006-ish were our earliest monitors. I inherited the role of coordinating volunteers joining the Watershed Center in 2016. We have about 30 stream sites across the watershed, on about 20 different streams. We have about 20 volunteer teams, and each of our and that's about 75 volunteers annually that are involved in the program. There's probably a core 40, 45 volunteers that come back year after year. When we bump that number up to 75-ish annually, folks oftentimes bring their friends or engage, their neighbor or family member in monitoring. Our program is a little bit different than many of them across the state, in that our volunteer teams independently sample their stream sites sometime in our open sampling window in October and June. So they pick up their gear from the Watershed Center. They're sampling on their own time. Our teams are composed of at least 2 individuals, but some teams have 5, 6, 7 folks involved. Most of our teams are utilizing MiCorps' new 2020 biotic index. We have a few teams that were left to transition to that 2020 biotic index and that slight nuance change to the protocol. And here's the spatial spread of our data. This was from our annual report actually, this particular map was from for a different project, but it represents our 2022 and 2021 data, most recent data. This was for some of the partners who are interested in seeing where our volunteers were monitoring and what type of scores we were getting in different stream segments. Very similar to what we include in our annual report. So I'm going to talk a little bit about presenting our data to the public and then a little bit about using our data. So as I mentioned, we have a program annual report that we generate each year that displays our data in those different ranking groups across the watershed. We use ArcMap for that. We send that annual report to our sponsors, our participants, sometimes partner organizations. Many of our volunteer teams, or I should say most of our volunteer teams, are sponsored by a local organization or business. That can be a lake association. Tom's Food Market is a sponsor, Munson Medical Center. So lots of bigger local organizations that sponsor financially our teams, and we share the progress of our program with those sponsors. We occasionally display our data at tabling events if we're at a festival or a conference or something like that. Again, I mentioned sharing our data with partners. Examples would be the Grand Traverse Regional Land Conservancy. They're a big land conservancy in the area. We share our data so that they know where our volunteers are monitoring in relation to their preserves. We actually partnered with them last year as part of a Rotary Community Science Grant, and we added several sites that the Grand Traverse Regional Land Conservancy volunteers are stepping up to monitor. We share our data with tribal governments, other nonprofit organizations. An example is a Conservation Resource Alliance. They do a lot of road stream crossing, culvert improvements, bridge restoration, that type of thing. And we share our data specifically when they are going to do a project on one of the streams that our volunteers monitor, and we share data before and after their restoration efforts. We publish our Adopt a Stream data in our watershed protection plans. We have had several watershed protection plans in the Grand Traverse area, but our most recent focus on our coastal communities. And those results help us determine the most impaired streams and help us determine what those tasks are in our watershed protection plan, those prioritized tasks. And we share our data each year in our newsletter with all of our members and our supporters, our partners. And then switching on to using our data, we use our data in a number of different ways. An example is if we are potentially going to litigate with a big polluter and we want to prove impairment to a particular section of a stream, we ensure that we are, collecting robust data that falls under a quality assurance project plan, and we use data to support those potential litigation efforts. For instance, compiling data in a legal document. We use our Adopt a Stream data to advocate for protection. We might share that with local decision makers like planning commissioners or township board members. An example of this is we had a stream up in Sutton's Bay, a big development came in, they called it, a drainage ditch or an unnamed stream. We ensured that we shared our data that proved that it was a high quality functioning, ecologically functioning stream to our planning commissioners so that they had that information and they didn't just assume that it was just a drainage ditch or something that wasn't providing ecological services. We've also used the data to advocate for protection. An example is we had a hot chlorinated discharge into one of our really small brook trout streams that when we monitored for several seasons in our Adopt a Stream program, and we were able to prove that that hot discharge was impacting our invertebrate community at the stream site. And that helped us gain some traction with EGLE as they were getting this hot discharge into a NPDES permit, and they were setting parameters for that particular discharge permit. We use the data to assess our restoration efforts. I mentioned that we do before and after when we have restoration to see how fast maybe a stream recovers from restoration, to see how it might be impacted. Again, working with our partners that are doing that restoration as well. We use our Adopt a Stream data to determine restoration needs. An example of this is some of the monitoring data that has been taken on Kids Creek. Kids Creek is an impaired water. It's impaired for mostly stormwater input. So it has a compromised macroinvertebrate community, lots of stormwater inputs, changes to hydrology. It's been on the impaired waters list for probably at least 15 years, and we've been working for just as long to help move it from the impaired waters list. And we look at our Adopt a Stream data to try to figure out which areas of the stream might be the best candidates for a new restoration project. We applied for a GLRI grant to do a habitat improvement, riparian habitat improvement along Kids Creek, and we use that data to support that grant application. We're going to start that project here soon. And then we collect data and use it for it's baseline data. We can try to understand the stream system and have kind of baseline data that gives us a long-term picture of water quality in the stream. We have a lot of development in the Grand Traverse region, a lot of wetland fill and loss of riparian habitat. We have strategically placed volunteer teams in tributaries that we know upstream is undergoing tremendous development pressure. And we are hoping to get a good picture of how the stream may change over time with development activities happening upstream. So that's what I have kind of as a summary of our Adopt a Stream program and how we share that data and how we use it in local management decisions. Any questions? I see a raised hand.
Alex, go ahead.
Hi. I was wondering, when you're thinking about like how you're going to end up using your data, present your data, how much does that inform what sites you decide to sample from? Like how do you pick your sampling sites?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it depends on many factors. We oftentimes are well connected with a number of our partners in the area, conservation districts, land conservancies, other nonprofits, and we solicit feedback. Where do we think we need data? Where are people interested in learning a little bit more about the stream? Tribal governments is another partner that we make sure that we're communicating where we're sampling. So they oftentimes will say, hey, we really think it would be important to sample at this stream site. We know it's a problem, or perhaps this is where we're going to do some restoration. We'd love to get some before and after. So we certainly look for feedback on where to place new volunteer teams. Sometimes volunteers have a particular desire to sample. Maybe it's a stream in their backyard or one that they've fished or something like that. And we take that into consideration as well. And then with some of the stream sites, I mentioned our partnership with the Grand Traverse Regional Land Conservancy. They had particular sites along their newest property that they were interested in gathering data. So we've worked together to kind of coordinate some volunteers in that region. And then again, when we know that there's a lot of development happening upstream, for those that are familiar with the Grand Traverse Bay Watershed, the Hammond corridor on the south side of Traverse City is one that's lots of wetland there and immense development pressure. It's in the headwaters of Mitchell Creek, another impaired stream in our watershed. So we're strategically placing volunteers at those sites.
Thank you.
We'll do one more question, then we'll move on to Ralph. There's a question in the chat from Jim. Using your plan commission example, are you proactively attending their meetings to know when your data is needed? Or do they reach out to the Watershed Center as a resource in their decision making? It's a great question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is lots of different ways. In both of those examples, we proactively watch some priority communities' agendas so that we know. We also advocate. We have a big advocacy program focused on local decision making, mostly with those local units of government, township, municipalities. So we watch agendas in priority communities. Sometimes we find out that way. Sometimes planning commissions that we have a good relationship with, they might specifically ask us. They might say, hey, we know there's a big project coming on one of the tributaries of Kitts Creek. We know that you do a lot of monitoring. Can you share any data? So sometimes that happens. We watch for the public notices for the EGLE project for Part 303, 301, and 325. Those are those water resources permits related to wetlands, inland lakes, and streams, and the Great Lakes. So that can be another way where we might learn about a particular project in our area and then step in and share our data.
Okay, thank you very much, Heather. Well, if you have more questions for Heather, just hold on to them, write it down, just a note so you don't forget it, and we'll hopefully have time to come back to them later. All right, Ralph.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, Ralph, take it away.
Okay. Okay, can you see everything?
I can, thank you. It says questions though, so I think you're at the end.
Okay, let me back up here. Okay.
There we go.
All right, well, hello everyone. My name is Ralph Bednarz, and I want to thank the MiCorps management for giving me the opportunity to talk to you today. I'm participating today as the current president of the Rennie Lake Association, the RLA. But for those who don't know me, I have a long history with the MiCorps program and the Cooperative Lakes Monitoring Program. I'm pleased to wear a different hat today to present my perspective on the importance of the MiCorps CLMP program for an individual lake, Rennie Lake. So Rennie Lake is located southeast of Traverse City in Grand Traverse County in East Bay Charter Township's what's known as the Forest Lakes District, along with Arbutus Lake, Spider Lake, and 11 other smaller lakes. Rennie Lake is a high quality, relatively small and shallow inland lake, 238 acres surface area, 27 feet maximum depth. It has 135 lakefront parcels and a little bit of grandfathered keyhole development. So there are about 145 riparian parcels total, but it also has approximately a mile of a state forest shoreline, which is located in the north part of the lake where my cursor is moving along now. The Rennie Lake Association is a new association. When my wife and I first moved into our house on Rennie Lake in 2019, I reached out to several lakefront property owners to form a steering committee to determine the interest in forming a lake association. Rennie Lake never had a lake association. We initially had about 7 members on the committee, but 2 dropped out to form another organization to focus on a land management concern that was brewing at the same time. The remaining 5 steering committee members incorporated the Rennie Lake Association as a Michigan nonprofit corporation in April 2021. It had its official members meeting in August of 2021. We obtained a federal 501c3 status in February of 2022 and held its first annual meeting in June of 2022. Which we've had 49 members. The mission of the Rennie Lake Association is displayed on the screen. So prior to purchasing our property on Rennie Lake, I searched for water quality data on the lake, and finding none, I searched for and reached out to a lakefront property owner to get involved with the Cooperative Lakes Monitoring Program in 2015. This person took the CLMP training and became a volunteer collecting second-disc transparency, spring and summer total phosphorus her first year, as well as doing an exotic aquatic plant watch survey on the lake. She continued in the Cooperative Lakes Monitoring Program from 2016 to 2018, collecting second-disc transparency and total phosphorus data. I joined her when I moved onto the lake in 2019, and we added chlorophyll A to complete the suite of trophic state parameters. During the CLMP lapse year of 2020, I continued the second-disc transparency measurements and the exotic aquatic plant watch survey and did a shore survey. I also worked with the local lab, the Great Lakes Environmental Center, to process total phosphorus and chlorophyll A samples so we would not miss a year of these data, since the state was not supporting that parameter in 2020. In 2021, we measured dissolved oxygen temperature along with the trophic state parameters and did the exotic aquatic plant watch survey. This year in 2022, we measured the trophic state parameters, the exotic aquatic plant watch survey, and we completed a full aquatic plant survey on the lake. So over the 8 years in the CLMP, we have participated in all the parameters and built the water quality data foundation for Rennie Lake. So how do we use the data? First, the Cooperative Lakes Monitoring Program data collection effort was the main selling point for the formation of the Rennie Lake Association. These data provide the baseline water quality status of the lake, and over time will allow us to assess changes and trends in water quality. Currently, the data are used for riparian education, as well as the basis for protective lakes management initiatives. Rennie Lake is a high-quality oligomesotrophic lake. The data record is too short to ascertain any changes or trends in the lake at this time, but early indicators may be showing nutrient stressors and decline of water transparency. We know the fishery has changed based on a long-term DNR fishery survey and stocking record, and perhaps climate change has been a factor. Aquatic invasive species early detection. So the results of the annual exotic aquatic plant watch surveys have indicated no target species, the species that are listed in that program, AIS species in Rennie Lake. But there are several patches of Phragmites and purple loosestrife, and we recently discovered a Chinese mystery snail population in a small bay of the lake. I think these data indicate that we may want to think about expanding this particular parameter in the Cooperative Lakes Monitoring Program to include some of these other additional AIS species. These data have been used in part to successfully stop a private landowner from commercializing a large tract of land and waterfront on Rennie Lake for large events and public boat access to the lake. Rennie Lake does not have developed public boat access, but it does have public access through the state lands. This particular development would have allowed or funneled up to 60 boats a day onto the lake, and we're pleased that that has been stopped at this point in time. And Heather Smith and the Watershed Center were part of some of this discussion with the township. Score to shore on Rennie Lake. As I previously mentioned, we conducted the score to shore survey during the lapse year of 2020. We surveyed 31 approximately 1,000 foot sections of the shoreline. The results are shown here, and we compared them to the entire CLMP shore to score data set from 2015 to 2020, thanks to Paul Steen helping provide those data. The median overall score for Rennie Lake was a little higher than the median overall score for the entire data set at that time. But the Rennie Lake median total littoral score was lower. And more about this in the next few slides. We created an assessment rating using these data for Rennie Lake with the results shown here. The diagram on the top right is the littoral zone, which shows that it has the lowest rating with approximately 70% of 31 sections rated either fair or poor. And again, we'll get into a little bit more of that in the next couple slides. Here's some examples of the Rennie Lake shorelines during the 2020 survey. There are some typical development pressures with lawn and beaches, but also a significant portion of natural shorelines on Rennie Lake. As many of you know and have experienced, the water levels were at historic high levels in many Michigan lakes in 2020, 2021. The consequence of this on Rennie Lake shorelines were flooded properties, as well as emergency sandbagging that evolved into rock riprap and unfortunately, for one property, a Great Lakes seawall. The documentation of these activities was an important byproduct of the Shore to Shore survey. Large woody habitat in fish sticks. The woody habitat assessment was another important result of the Shore to Shore survey. The Rennie Lake sections had less down trees woody habitat as compared to the entire Shore to Shore data set. This was concerning to me, which led to an opportunity to do a successful fish stick project with my neighbor in 2021. We have oak wilt going through the area, and my neighbor was removing 7 trees. And I talked to him about maybe putting a couple of those trees in the water, and he agreed. He's actually from Texas. He's a seasonal property owner. We went ahead and got a permit and did the project, and very successful project. Very, very pleased about the results of this particular project. And that all came about because of the Shore to Shore program. This is an example of some violations that have occurred on Rennie Lake. And so another important aspect of the Shore to Shore survey are the shoreline photos that are collected. Now, I know we're not looking at individual properties in that survey, but 1,000-foot sections, but you tend to find out the individual properties when you do the scoring of them and you take some photos. Development continues on the Rennie Lake shorelines with little regard for state, county, and township regulations. The property on the left was purchased when flooded during the 2020 high water levels and remodeled to turn it into a short-term rental property. Unfortunately, the developer added fill to the lake during the remodeling process without a permit. The property on the right is a new home built in a condominium development on Rennie Lake. As you can see from the photos, the developer cut down all the trees and stripped the land down to the lake shoreline and without proper permits from the county or the township. Both these properties were cited for violations and will have mitigation processes for the damages. Riparian education. The main purpose of the Rennie Lake Association is for riparian education. The more we can educate, encourage lake stewardship, the better the lake and the community. The Rennie Lake Association produces a newsletter twice a year that delivers some of this important education to the members. Here's a view of the fall newsletter with an article on the full aquatic plant survey I mentioned previously. And for that survey, a total of 96 stations at 32 transect locations were sampled and 364 rake tows were made to complete the full aquatic plant survey on Rennie Lake. The results indicate a healthy but sparse plant community in Rennie Lake. A total of 19 different aquatic plant species were found. The most common aquatic plants found were Chara, which is a macroalgae, bushy pondweed, which is a naiad species, and variable pondweed. The table shown here includes a complete list of aquatic plants and their distribution found in the August 2022 surveys. These results, along with the relatively low amount of woody habitat, further explain the lower littoral zone score found in the Shore to Shore survey on Rennie Lake. And with that, I'll just open it up for questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Rel. Just if you want to stop sharing your screen every once in a while, you get dragged out because you're using all your bandwidth, but it worked out good. Thanks. So any questions for Ralph? Thank you, Ralph. That was really useful. Paul.
Yeah, Ralph, that's, in my experience, has the best use of Score the Shore data I've seen yet. So that's really cool. I really liked how you were comparing your lake to overall averages to figure out where you're deficient, and then you had direct fixes with the fish stick. So that was cool. I really like that. My question is, you mentioned that you were able to stop that one development with, and you didn't give too much detail on it, but I was wondering if you could give a little bit more detail on that particular example, and maybe if any of your data played into how you were able to stop what they were doing.
Yeah, actually, it was a whole army of people that spoke up to the township to get this development stopped, and actually the development was. There's a long story behind this, and I don't have time to provide it all, but the main reason the development was stopped by the township through the PUD process, the plan unit development process, was more for the large events that they were planning than for the lakefront and lake use. So that really was what stopped it. But we used the aquatic invasive species data through the Exotic Aquatic Plant Watch and the additional species to look for. And since we had none of the actual target species, nor any of the watch list species, the DNR watch list species, we were able to use that information in front of the commissioners as well as the trustees of the township to show that we don't have these species on Rennie Lake. Rennie Lake does not have a developed public boat launch, while the other major lakes within the Forest Lakes districts do have public boat launches, and they all have invasive species. So we all know that boat launches is the main vector of moving aquatic invasive species from one lake to another, and we didn't want to see public funneling of boats through a private property bringing in these invasive species. But there was some legal actions going on. We had two legal events, two groups that filed lawsuits. The first group settled, and part of that settlement was, well, if you're gonna bring in 60 boats a day onto the lake, then you should have a boat wash station before you do that. Mm-hmm. And they actually agreed to that, but they didn't agree to any formal process for doing it. And we found out after the fact that what they were planning on was not sufficient to protect the lake from invasive species. And then the other lawsuit, because the developer pulled out of the PUD process, that was just ended. So at this point, we don't have that happening on Rennie Lake, and hopefully we won't see that again. Although the property does have good use for hiking and things like that. And at some point in time, we may see that happen again within the community. We'll see.
Okay, I see Jim has his hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, I'm Jim Ayers. I'm a new volunteer that will be assuming the responsibilities, I think, next summer for Crystal Lake in Montcalm County. So this is my first exposure. I appreciate the conference. I'm interested in your efforts to do education, riparian education. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about some of the vehicles you use, what groups you target, and how do you really get the word out there to your different constituents in your area? Thank you.
Yeah, so again, I mentioned this is a new association, and we've really been in existence for just a little over a year. So our main effort for getting information out in the education is through our newsletter at this point in time. We also provide some information during the annual meetings, but we plan on holding other events within the Rennie Lake community to do some specific presentations on the specific different parameters that we do monitor for within the Cooperative Lakes program. And hopefully we'll be doing that over the next couple of years. But mainly at this point in time, we're using the newsletter as the main vector of doing that education.
Okay, we have a couple of questions in the chat, Ralph. One is, great information. How do you balance the academic, scientific nature of the data and then make it easy for the lake community to grasp? I feel like I can often talk over people's level of understanding of how the data is collected, presented. Is there anything that you find particularly effective for your lake? Jim asked this. Jim.
So that's a tough one for me too, being a retired limnologist that really worked through the whole Cooperative Lakes monitoring program from its expansion years. So, you know, I bring a lot of technical aspects to my role as president of the Rennie Lake Association. So the communications, I always have to really check myself on that. I think some of the words of wisdom that Chelsea provided earlier are really where we need to be. We need to you know, present our message so our audience, the audience that we're presenting it to, really understands, and that's really downing some of the technical words and things like that. So a lot of examples, pictures, but every riparian that lives on a lake and a stream needs to come up to a certain level of education to really understand some of the complexities that we just talked about. And so I think it's upon all of us to really try to bring in some of the technical aspects of all of this, so they can get to that level of understanding, so we can talk in the same terms.
Okay, just one more. Matt Church wanted you to expand on the remediation actions for those violations that you showed with the pictures. They're having similar issues on their lake.
Yeah, again, this could be a long discussion, and Matt, feel free to contact me directly if you want. But the East Bay Charter Township, fortunately, has an overlay district zoning, specifically for the Lakes District. And within that zoning, there are certain parameters that have to be followed, including for the first 30 feet, there's a 50-foot setback. For the first 30 feet, 80% of the vegetation needs to remain. And then after that, 50% up to the 50-foot setback. So right there are the criteria for mitigation. As far as enforcement and how they're going to do that, the township, unfortunately, has not been good at that. They're getting better, and they're getting educated by all of us riparians about that. And so, yeah, protective lakes management has to start at the grassroots. We have to educate not only the riparians, but we have to educate the township officials to uphold their zoning ordinances as well as enforce them. So that's something that every township that has lakes needs to do. And hopefully over time, we can see more and more of that. I know we will in East Bay Charter Township.
Okay. One more quick one. Did you find any significant differences between the GLEC analysis and the CLMP results?
I kind of missed that question. So what
just
analysis?
Came in. Did you find any significant differences between the GLEC water chem analysis results and then the CLMP results?
Yeah, so unfortunately, the state is not accepting the GLEC data in the database, the CLMP database. At this point in time, I'm pushing for that because the Great Lakes Environmental Center actually was the consultant for the National Lakes Assessment. And they also have done a lot of the water chemistry work for the DNR's Status and Trends program. So they are a qualified, approved laboratory. And so their results really should be accepted in the Cooperative Lakes Monitoring Program database. But there is in data, when you saw it, the summer phosphorus data was quite high for 2020. And I'm not sure if that's an outlier. I'm not sure if that's because of laboratory differences, although the differences shouldn't really be there. They're the same procedures that are used. But we didn't do any side-by-side analysis with the state labs, so I can't really say if that's in agreement or not. The other thing about the 2020 data is that, as I mentioned, that was when we had these record high water levels, and thus obviously shoreline properties were flooded. There's a lot of old septic systems along those shorelines, and thus that data may be real. We'll have to see the long-term data as it plays out and see what we find.
Okay, thanks, Ralph. That was really worthwhile, and I agree. I never thought about so far comparing Score the Shore for one lake with everything we had. I didn't realize we had so many lakes do Score the Shore yet because of my relatively newness to the program. So that was really great. All right, Paul.
Yeah. In thinking about data use, the one thing, I don't have that much time, so which is fine. I was happy to be the caboose because I have plenty of time to talk today. So I'm just going to share a couple of tidbits, a couple of highlights of things that I think about when I think about data use. And the thing I struggle with the most is how to get people to look at it, which is very meta right now because I'm giving a presentation about trying to keep you interested on data with the purpose of keeping the larger external audience interested in looking at data. And so since I've been at the Watershed Council, I'm always struggling with this concept of both bringing it to people's level where they're at, but like Ralph said, trying to achieve a certain level of education so that we're talking on the same plane, and that's just this like really hard thing to do. I've kind of in my mind divide between like general public, general citizens versus professionals in the field. So watershed councils have to work with both. Now, one thing so going to the professional side, one thing that we do is extensive watershed management plans. So let me just do a really quick screen share. Here. So I just have a few documents that I was just gonna to show kind of what we do with our data. Watershed management plans are something that you write often through 319 EGLE grants, and the purpose of, and then it eventually goes through the EPA and they get approved that way. And the purpose is to address impaired waters. And one of the best benefits of writing a management plan for your particular area is that things that go in here and then get approved by EGLE and EPA then become eligible for grant funding. So that's where we form a lot of the basis of our ideas of what we recommend for restoration, but all of that derives first from the underlying baseline data that we collect in programs like MiCorps. So recently I wrote this big watershed management plan for the part of the Huron. It's this like 300-page document, right? So it's like, how do you get people to read this? It's so hard. So that's something that I'm struggling with. But what the baseline of this plan is going through each of these areas that you can see on the map, and we just bring up all of our data. So we're talking about natural areas, and we have hydrology, we have morphology, all these things, every little bit of assessment, some related to MiCorps and some not. And it all goes into this plan. We do a lot, here's all of our habitat monitoring sites for this section. We do phosphorus, we do nutrients. Let me just scroll down to the insects. So this is more than me too. This is our whole staff kind of does this together. Temperature, dissolved oxygen, so like all this stuff. Here's my insects, all the sites, my this is where I present the water quality rating, which is a scale of 0 to 10, and our diversity metrics. So all of this goes into these plans, and then from that, you look at it from its geographic basis of trying to understand where are the worst and the best places, and it provides that that basis for your arguments, which essentially that's what I almost see these plans as, is like a scientific argument to EGLE and to EPA saying these are the bad places, and now we want to do these 5 things. We want to restore this particular stream bank. We want to put in riparian zone in this section. We want to do a road stream crossing assessment so we understand where the sediment is, and what culverts are the bad culverts blocking fish, and then so EGLE and EPA will have that, and we'll have some back and forth with the staff there, and eventually they'll approve it after edits and changes and working together. And now we have, because of the data building up to these recommendations, you have, depending on the size of your watershed and what you want to do, like anywhere between 1 and 30 recommendations that are all now fundable. So we have this list of things that we can now look for grants, and try to get money to fund to actually make changes on the ground. But it all starts from this baseline data. Without that, we wouldn't be able to walk into these meetings and be able to say with authority what's going on in these different places. But the report itself is like 300 pages. So how do you get anyone to look at that? I think the thing is, you don't. This is very much a planning document, and it's good we work with townships and cities, but it's really hard to get to the local, the citizens through this type of data charts and recommendations and stuff like that. So it's very important to do the stuff that Chelsea is talking about too. And one thing that we do pretty well in that regard, which I was going to show, is we then now we have a mapping system where we can break down all the different areas of our watershed in a more visually pleasing way. And the intention of this is now to start to reach our regular citizens. So we encourage people to go to this map, and then they get the opportunity to find their house. We have it broken down by creek shed. So just give this a second to load. So they can find their particular, where they live, and they can check out that particular area, clicking on the streams to bring up information. And then over here on the left-hand side, this is Esri's story map, by the way, is where we can present our data. And we try to do it in such ways that is not just a table, but is a little more interesting. We include history, facts about the watershed. We give our scores here. What we do is we break down all those different parameters that we stuffed into the watershed management plan, kind of in a technical text. We have broken down, and we've just given score rankings like school A, B, C, D. A lot of those are just with rankings of our own design. A lot of these don't have particular standards that we're following, but it's our professional judgment. For example, here's land use for this particular area, and we gave it a B because it's a lot of agriculture, which definitely degrades the stream in this regard. And here's my aquatic insect. Actually, for this creek shed, we only go to one place, and people can click on the dots and find what's been going on in this creek. So that we hit 12 already. But that just gives kind of a sense of both my internal processing of data and the struggle I have that you have to make it useful and visually appealing and communicable, all those things. It's a hard task. I'll stop. Maybe time for 1 or 2 questions before we take a break.
It is
to any person, not just to me.
Yeah, it is 12 o'clock, so feel free to log off if you, but let's just see if we can find one question for Paul. Let me look at the comments real quick. Oh, Chelsea's shared a link to her MiCorps training video for community outreach. Anybody have a question for Paul? Okay, I don't see anything. I think we're hungry, Paul.
Let's do lunch.
Well, everybody knows where to find Paul. And if you need the contact information for anybody who talked today, I think we could talk for a couple more hours, it sounds like. So if you have more questions and you need their contact information, just let me know. And this, as Paul noted early, is being recorded, so you can watch it again later. Thanks, everyone.